In the warm months of the summer of 1944, the United States Army faced a brutal problem that felt more like a grim equation than a normal battlefield challenge. In the hedgerows of Normandy, the life of an American tank crew was not measured in long stretches of time, but in short weeks filled with smoke and terror. The Sherman tank that the crews rode in was often called a Ronson lighter because once a German shell touched it, the tank lit up instantly. The German Panthers and Tigers were years ahead in design and firepower, and the Sherman was weaker than them in every possible way. It carried a 75mm gun that struggled to break the armor of a Panther from 500 yards, while the German guns could destroy a Sherman from 2,000 yards before the American soldiers even saw them. The Sherman was powered by gasoline, which made it burn fast and bright when hit. The official doctrine said that 5 Sherman tanks were needed to kill 1 Tiger, and that 3 of those Sherman tanks would likely be lost. It was a plan created by supply officers, not by men who had to stand inside a steel furnace while shells flew around them. But within that hopeless math stood a single exception. One tank commander who rejected the numbers and the fear that came with them. One fighter who refused to wait for help or hide behind cover. Staff Sergeant Lafayette Poole, the man who would later be called War Daddy. His record in 81 days was so violent and so unlikely that many soldiers believed he was not just a tank commander, but something supernatural. In that span, he and his crew destroyed 12 German tanks and more than 200 armored vehicles and self-propelled guns, and over 1,000 enemy soldiers. He became the sharp edge of the Spearhead Division. His attacks were so fast and so shocking that German prisoners asked officers whether America had created a new type of automatic tank. But to understand how one man could bend the battlefield rules, you must look at who he was before the war. Before the uniform and before the armor, Lafayette Poole was a fighter from Texas. He had grown up in heat and dust and learned to fight in local rings where he became a Golden Gloves boxing champion. In the ring, he fought exactly the way he would later fight in Europe. He did not dance. He did not step away. He believed in hitting first and hitting so hard that the other man had no chance to stand again. When he entered the army in 1941, this attitude put him at odds with military life. The army lived on rules and instructions and patient training, while Poole hated waiting and drilling and saluting. Officers offered him a chance to become an officer himself because they saw his leadership strength, but he turned every offer down. He said he wanted only one thing. He wanted to lead the best tank crew in the entire division. He wanted to be inside the turret, not behind a desk. That choice sealed his fate. It placed him in the 3rd Armored Division known as the Spearhead, but it also placed him inside the M4 Sherman, which was more coffin than shield. Many history books speak of the Sherman as the weapon that won the war because it was reliable and easy to build in huge numbers, but the men inside it knew the truth. It was a vulnerable machine fighting against armor that was thicker and guns that were stronger. By 1944, the German tanks were almost a generation ahead. A Panther had front armor so strong that a regular American shell often bounced off without leaving more than a mark. Meanwhile, the German high-velocity guns could pierce a Sherman like soft wood. Every time a Sherman crew went forward, they knew one hit could turn their vehicle into a fireball. Yet Poole looked at this uneven fight and made a decision that no manual supported. He decided to turn the weakness of the Sherman into a strange kind of strength. The tank was thin but fast. The turret moved quicker than the big German turrets. Poole understood that staying still or fighting long-range duels would only lead to death. The numbers proved that. So he created a new style of fighting. A wild and aggressive tactic built on speed and shock. He would close the distance. He would rush the enemy. He would fight like a boxer who dove inside the long reach of a bigger opponent. He told his officers that he would drive straight into the path of the German army. He said he would not stalk or sneak. He would hit hard and fast and keep moving so quickly that the enemy could not aim well enough to stop him. This idea sounded insane to many, but a tank is more than steel. It is a team of 5 who must think and move as one. Poole knew this, and he built his crew the same way a boxer chooses his corner team. He looked for men who seemed strange misfits on paper, but who together could become something unmatched. He chose Wilbert Richards, a quiet young man, as his driver. Richards had a touch with the controls. He could feel the engine and glide the tank even over rough ground. Poole trusted him to drive into danger without hesitation. He chose Del Boggs, a rough and angry man, as his loader. Boggs could lift heavy shells and slam them into the gun faster than anyone. The bow gunner was Bert Close, a 17-year-old who lied about his age. He looked like a school kid, but behind the sights of a .30 caliber machine gun, he became calm and deadly. And the gunner was Willis Oler, a nervous man outside the tank, but a perfect machine inside it. His eyes noticed everything. He could spot a helmet glint or a barrel tip long before others. These 5 men created the tank they named in the mood. They arrived in France after D-Day ready for battle. The real nightmare was the Normandy hedgerows. Old earth walls 6 feet high, topped with tangled growth that turned fields into tight killing boxes. German tanks hid behind them, waiting for an American tank to climb up and reveal its weak belly. Most American crews crawled forward in fear, but Poole did not. He made his first major attack near a village where American infantry were trapped under German fire. The rules said to wait for artillery or air support, but Poole ordered his crew forward. They burst through the hedgerow and shocked the Germans with a moving attack that shattered the strongpoint in minutes. When the smoke cleared, the other soldiers stared at the lone Sherman, standing in an open field with no damage at all. And from that moment, the legend of Lafayette Poole began to spread. Poole had chosen his crew not by the standards of the manuals, but by instinct, and those instincts proved right as soon as the fighting grew harsher. He needed a driver who would ignore fear and obey without hesitation, and Baby Richards was exactly that kind of man. When everything around them screamed, Danger Richards pushed the accelerator harder instead of slowing down. Next was the loader Del Boggs, known as Jailbird, a man with a rough past, who had chosen the army over a cell and carried his anger into every battle. His job inside the tank demanded constant strength because he had to lift wide, heavy steel shells and slam them perfectly into the breach, while the tank bounced and shook and filled with smoke. Yet Boggs did it faster than anyone in the division. His speed turned the slow-firing 75mm gun into something close to an automatic cannon. Behind the bow gun sat young Bert Close, the kid, only 17, who had lied to join the war. His face still looked soft and unready for war, but when he held the .30 caliber machine gun, he became a calm and deadly guardian of the lower hull. Any German infantry trying to get close were cut down before they reached the tracks. Finally, there was Willis Oler, the gunner they called Groundhog, because he always looked nervous and tired outside the tank, yet inside the turret he became someone entirely different. He had perfect sight through the scope. He could notice a helmet shine through leaves at 800 yards. He could put a shell into a window while the tank moved over broken ground. Together, these men formed the crew of the Sherman. They painted with bold white letters that read in the mood. For them, the name was a promise. They were always ready for a fight. They landed in France right after D-Day when the beaches were safe, but the real war still waited inland. The hedgerows of Normandy were a nightmare for armor. These hedges were ancient living walls built over centuries, 6 feet tall, with thick roots and layers of growth on top. The fields they enclosed were tight and trapped. A tank that tried to climb one of the walls exposed its belly, which was the thinnest armor of the Sherman. German soldiers knew exactly where to hide their guns and where to wait for the American tanks. They had mapped every gap, every crossing, every likely approach. The 3rd Armored Division was struggling to break through. Many crews were slow and fearful because they knew the German 88mm guns could kill them before they saw anything, but Poole refused to crawl. He believed that moving fast was the only thing that kept them alive. His first major action happened near the small village of Villiers-Fossard, where American infantry were pinned in mud under machine gun fire. Reports said a panzer force was closing in to reinforce the enemy. Standard orders said to wait for support, do not attack alone, but Poole heard the cries of the trapped soldiers and snapped. He pressed the radio and shouted for his platoon to follow him. Then he ordered Baby Richards to ram through the hedgerow. The tank burst through dirt and roots and landed in the open field with a crash. The Germans were shocked. They expected cautious Americans, but instead they saw a raging Sherman firing its main gun while still moving. Poole stood tall in the open hatch, which became his trademark. While most commanders hid inside their turret with only periscopes to see through, Poole insisted on exposing his upper body because he needed to see the whole battlefield. He believed he could smell danger better that way. With a cigar clenched in his teeth, he barked orders at Ola. Infantry at 2 o'clock hedge line. Ola answered by firing a perfect round that exploded inside the German position. Baby, turn left. Keep moving, do not stop. The tank skidded across wet ground. A German anti-tank round ripped past the turret so close that the shock wave knocked air out of Poole's chest, yet he did not duck. Loader, give me another. Boggs slammed another shell in. Close fired the bow gun into the tree line, cutting down German soldiers who tried to flee. The crew was now working as one single machine. Within minutes, the German strongpoint collapsed. Enemy vehicles burned. Their machine gun positions went silent. The infantry, who had been pinned now, rose from the mud and stared at the lone Sherman standing in the open with its engine rumbling, not a scratch on it. When the remaining platoon rolled up, they could only stare at what Poole had done. Rumors spread fast. Soldiers whispered that a crazy Texan was driving his Sherman like a fighter plane and refusing to retreat. But inside this growing legend, a clear truth showed itself. Poole was fearless, but he was also reckless in a way many could not understand. He refused to close the hatch, even during mortar fire, because he said he could not sense the battlefield through a narrow slot. He pushed his crew hard through endless nights of cleaning the gun and checking the engine. He barely slept and often muttered that survival was not the goal. Victory was the goal. Break the enemy before they break you. This philosophy worked against light units and scattered infantry, but the real test was ahead. The German big cats, panthers, and tigers were waiting in greater numbers as the Americans prepared for Operation Cobra, which would break the stalemate of Normandy. When the breakout began, the 3rd Armored Division moved across France, and Poole constantly begged to take point. Being the front tank meant being the first targeted, yet he insisted he could sense ambushes before they unfolded. Many officers doubted him until they saw how often he was right. His eyes caught unnatural patterns in bushes or the shine of lenses deep in trees long before others noticed. Near Saint-Lô, the division faced German armor that blocked the way. Many Sherman crews hesitated, but Poole passed them and roared to the front. This time he faced a panzer at 400 yards. The German gun swung toward him. He shouted for Baby to brake. The Sherman skidded to a halt. The German shell passed inches above their turret. Ola fired instantly, hitting the panzer between its hull and turret. Flames burst upward. Poole immediately called for the next target. They destroyed enemy vehicles one after another. Close mowed down a fleeing half-track. Boggs kept loading without pause, but each victory carried a cost. The tank was wearing down. The engine ran too hot. The tracks groaned. The crew lived on nerves and caffeine. Yet they kept going because Poole drove them forward like a storm that refused to blow out. And the Germans soon learned to fear a Sherman named in the mood whenever it appeared on the horizon. The legend of Lafayette Poole spread across the division long before anyone in higher command officially noticed him, because word of mouth traveled faster than radio messages. Soldiers said there was a wild Texan who refused to reverse and who fought his tank like he was still inside a boxing ring. They said he stood in the hatch even during mortar strikes, because he insisted he needed to breathe the battlefield, not just look at it. But along with the awe, there was a warning. Poole was fearless to the point of madness. He treated risk as if it were nothing. He never closed the hatch. He barely rested. He made his men check every part of the tank until they were exhausted. He once told them that they were not there to survive the war, but to win it, and winning meant killing the enemy faster than the enemy could kill them. That mindset worked against scattered infantry and light armored units, but the true test was waiting ahead. The German army still held its strongest machines, Panthers with thick sloped armor, Tigers with the terrifying 88mm guns that turned Shermans into burning shells before American crews even saw them. As Operation Cobra began and the Allied forces broke out of the hedgerows, the 3rd Armored Division surged forward with speed. It was no longer a slow, miserable crawl through hedges. Now it was a rapid advance across open fields and country roads, and Poole always demanded the lead position. Taking point meant being the first to drive into ambushes, being the first to be targeted, and usually the first to die. Yet he insisted that he could sense danger before it struck, and often he proved right. His eyesight seemed unnatural. He could detect the gleam of a German scope deep in the shade of a forest. He could notice branches arranged in a way that only camouflaged guns would be arranged. Late in July, near the town of St. Lo, the division ran into a German blocking force made of Panzer IVs and self-propelled guns. American tanks hesitated. A line of Shermans slowed down, unsure how to break through. Poole did not wait for orders. He pushed in the mood forward past the cautious tanks. He shouted for them to clear the way and drove straight into the heart of the fight. A Panzer IV rolled out from behind a building about 400 yards ahead. Its turret swung toward Poole. In a moment of pure reflex, he shouted for Baby Richards to hit the brakes. The Sherman screeched to a halt. The German shell flashed across the front of their tank, missing them by the smallest of margins. The pressure wave rocked everyone inside. Oehler already had the crosshairs on the target. He fired before Poole even finished his command. The armor-piercing shell hit the German tank between turret and hull. A burst of smoke shot upward as flames consumed the interior. Poole did not celebrate. He immediately searched for more threats. A half-track tried to flee. Close cut it down with a burst from the bowgun. A German anti-tank gun tried to rotate toward them. Boggs loaded a high-explosive shell that Oehler fired into the gun emplacement, stopping it instantly. In a matter of minutes, Poole and his crew destroyed a list of targets that many platoons would take weeks to match. But the cost was building. The tank was pushing itself to its limit. The engine was overheating. The treads were wearing unevenly. The suspension groaned with every hard turn. The crew was worn down as well. Jailbird Boggs later joked that if he had stopped to think about the danger, he would have quit and gone back to Texas. The constant combat and the constant push forward became a lifestyle, not a series of missions. But Poole drove them onward. His energy was impossible to explain. It was as if he had become a force of nature. He would not let fatigue stop him, and the machine itself started to show cracks. The Sherman was never meant to be pushed this relentlessly. While most crews fought 1 or 2 battles before retreating for repairs, Poole crashed through dozens of fights without pause, and the Germans began to notice something strange. Reports filtered through their lines about a single American tank that moved like a ghost and struck like lightning. They thought it was a new model or a secret weapon. They called it the automatic tank because it fired so rapidly, but it was not a machine. It was simply Jailbird Boggs loading shells with bleeding hands and Oehler firing without hesitation while Poole kept urging them forward. By August, the legend reached the ears of General Morris Rose, the commander of the division. Rose was known as a strong, cold leader who disliked reckless behavior. He summoned Poole expecting perhaps to discipline him. Poole arrived covered in dust and sweat with ringing ears and chipped teeth from grinding them in stress. But instead of punishment, Rose simply asked how many vehicles he had destroyed that week. Poole shrugged and said he had stopped counting. Reports claimed his crew had cleared entire sectors on their own. Rose warned him that he was taking too many risks and that he would get himself killed. Poole replied with a statement that chilled even the hardened general. He said he was already dead, and the only thing left was to decide how many enemies he would take before he stopped breathing. Rose saw in that answer both brilliance and doom. Still, he allowed Poole to keep fighting because the results were undeniable. Every time In the Mood led the charge, the line moved forward. Every time Poole attacked, the Germans fell back in chaos, but the German resistance grew fiercer as they neared the Falaise region. The German army was desperate to escape encirclement. They were cornered and ready to fight with renewed fury. Intelligence warned of tigers in the area near a place called Frominal. The tiger was the worst fear of any Sherman crew. 60 tons of armor. A gun that could tear through them from any angle. To kill a tiger, you had to flank it, which meant surviving the first shot. As the column approached the narrow road lined with poplar trees, the radio crackled with a warning. A tiger ahead. Then it appeared like a giant blocking the entire route. Its turret turned slowly toward In the Mood. Poole did not reverse. He did not hide. He shouted for Baby to charge. The tiger was too slow to track the sudden rush. As they closed the distance, its first shot screamed overhead and shattered glass. Poole ordered Oler to wait. They needed a weak spot. When they reached 200 yards, Oler targeted the tracks. The shell broke the tread and spun the tiger sideways, exposing its weaker side. 2 more shots hit the flank. The tiger exploded in a roar that sent heat washing over the Sherman. They had done the unthinkable. They beat a tiger head-on. Poole lit a cigar with shaking hands and ordered them to keep moving because more enemies waited ahead. The closer they came to Germany, the heavier the resistance grew. And the closer Poole came to the moment when his unbelievable streak would finally collide with fate. General Rose had expected to discipline Poole for reckless behavior, but instead he found himself caught between strict military rules and the undeniable truth that wherever Poole fought, the German line cracked. After their meeting, the general warned Poole again that he was throwing his life away by taking such wild risks. But Poole simply repeated that he was already dead, and that only the number of enemies he destroyed before his final breath mattered. That bleak honesty spoke volumes about the mental strain he carried. He understood the odds better than anyone, yet he moved forward, as if the numbers did not apply to him at all. As the summer deepened, the German army grew more desperate. They were retreating toward the narrowing gap around Falaise, trying to escape the tightening noose of Allied forces. The 3rd Armored Division pressed them relentlessly, and In the Mood always led the charge. Reports came in about tigers in the area near Frominal, and everyone knew how deadly a tiger could be. It weighed 60 tons and carried armor so thick that a Sherman shell could not pierce its front even at point blank. Its 88mm gun was the terror of every American tank crew. Poole knew these facts, yet he drove forward anyway. The road to Frominal was tight and lined with tall poplar trees that created a perfect kill zone. When the radio suddenly screamed out a warning tiger ahead, the crew braced themselves. Through the openings between the trees they saw it, a massive shape blocking the road like a steel fortress. Its barrel slowly moved toward them. This was the kind of moment that forced most tank commanders to reverse or pop smoke or call for artillery. But Poole did none of that. He shouted for Baby Richards to drive straight at it. The Tiger gunner had aimed for a stationary or retreating target. He never expected a Sherman to charge full speed. In the Mood surged forward. 800 yards closed to 600, then to 400. The Tiger fired. The shell roared overhead and shattered every piece of glass in Poole's periscope. Poole held his position in the hatch and told Oler to wait. They needed a weak point. At 200 yards, Oler fired at the track. The shell tore through the tread, sending the Tiger spinning slightly and exposing its right side. That was the moment they needed. Oler fired again and again. 2 shells struck the weaker side armor. Fire burst out as the ammunition inside the Tiger cooked off. The explosion ripped the turret from the hull and sent flames shooting into the sky. Poole wiped grease from his face and lit a cigar with trembling fingers. Baby asked softly if he was all right. Poole answered by ordering them forward. More enemies waited, and he refused to slow down. Destroying the Tiger became a turning point not just in their mission, but in the minds of German soldiers. Tales of the ghost tank and the unstoppable American ace grew stronger. Yet even as Poole grew more confident, the truth remained that entire armies were now aware of him. He had become a marked man. The closer they moved toward the German border, the fiercer the resistance grew. Every village, every field, every river crossing turned into another fight. Yet Poole kept driving, as if struck by some inner force that refused to rest. By late August, his second tank had been lost to enemy fire. After escaping from the burning machine, he went straight to the motor pool and demanded another Sherman. This time he received an upgraded M4, a 176. The longer, 76mm gun finally gave them a chance to fight at somewhat even terms against German armor. Poole patted the gun barrel and told Boggs that now they could hurt the enemy properly. With this new weapon, their rampage grew darker and more intense. They attacked supply convoys. They tore apart rear guard units. They eliminated entire clusters of armored cars before the German guns could even fire. Reports described a single American tank appearing on the flanks like a shadow, then vanishing before any counterattack could form. German prisoners began asking about the automatic tank that destroyed entire columns. They believed it to be a new American invention. None realized it was just one Sherman with a tireless loader and a gunner whose vision seemed superhuman. Even more powerful than the upgraded weapon was the effect Poole had on the units behind him. His courage became infectious. When he charged, others charged. When he pushed forward, the infantry found new strength and advanced behind him. The 3rd Armored Division moved through France faster because Poole refused to slow down. Yet inside the tank, the constant strain began taking a toll. Richards drove through hallucinations because his mind barely slept. Roads sometimes looked like rivers or snakes, but he kept going because Poole told him to keep pushing. Close lost his youthful softness. His face grew hardened and streaked with soot. He had shot too many men to ever look like a boy again. Boggs fought with splintered fingernails and bleeding knuckles because the recoil and constant loading tore at his skin. Inside the cramped steel walls of the Sherman, their bodies were wearing down. Their nerves were fraying, and Poole himself was reaching a breaking point. He hardly slept. He chewed his teeth until they cracked. He could not close the hatch because he believed being buttoned up made him blind. He said that if he trusted the periscope, he would die. So he stood in the open rain dust and shrapnel striking him day after day, daring the enemy to take him. At the Battle of Columbia, this recklessness nearly ended their run. Twilight cast long shadows through a wooded area as they moved to flank a small town. Poole stood in the hatch, as always scanning the trees. Without warning, a German dual-purpose flak gun hidden in a barn opened fire. Green tracers tore through the air. One round scraped the edge of the hatch and sprayed sparks across Poole's face. He shouted for reverse, but Richards froze in fear. The tank stalled. In that instant, they were a perfect target for the German cannon. Poole did not drop inside. He grabbed the .50 caliber on the roof and stood fully exposed, firing at the barn while tracers sliced past his head. His bullets sparked against wood and ignited hay. Smoke filled the air, blinding the German crew long enough for Richards to restart the engine. The Sherman lurched backward as a German shell smashed into the spot where they had just been. They hid briefly in the trees, shaken and terrified. Poole dropped inside with blood streaking his face and told his men to go back out and kill the gun. They obeyed. They flanked the barn, and Oehler fired a 76mm shell that destroyed the flak cannon. That moment showed the strange power Poole held. He replaced fear with duty. His men moved because they could not imagine failing him. Yet the cost of their unbroken advance was adding up fast, and fate moved ever closer. Their incredible streak could not last forever. By the time September arrived, the truth of armored warfare revealed itself in the most painful way. Tanks were meant to be expendable, but the men inside were not. Yet Poole and his crew lived in a world that ignored this idea. They were burning through Shermans faster than the army could replace them. Their first tank in the Mood had not survived the early summer. It took a hit so violent that the entire crew barely escaped with their lives, stumbling out of the smoke with burning lungs and ringing ears. Most soldiers who escape a burning tank ask for rest or reassignment, but Poole did not hesitate. He marched straight to the motor pool and demanded a new machine. The Army handed him an improved model, the M4, a 176. At a glance it looked like another standard Sherman, but the longer, stronger 76mm gun gave them a fighting chance against German armor. Poole ran his hand across the barrel and told Jailbird Boggs that now they could truly hurt the enemy. With the new tank came a level of ferocity that stunned even seasoned officers. Their 81-day rampage became darker and heavier. The Germans began to whisper about a phantom tank that struck from nowhere, destroyed entire columns, and then vanished before anti-tank guns could respond. They did not know it was Poole. They did not know it was a boxer from Texas driving a steel machine like it was alive. They only knew that if they saw in the mood in their sector, their chances of survival dropped to nothing. Poole's attacks shattered supply routes and crushed rear-guard actions. The psychological weight of his presence became a weapon on its own. Even when American units were tired and beaten down, they pushed forward when they saw Poole charging because his courage felt contagious. His tank moved and the entire line moved, yet inside the turret and hull the cost of this madness was carving itself into the crew. A human body cannot fight for 81 days without breaking down. Baby Richards drove through exhaustion so deep he sometimes saw things that were not real. He later said that the road would shift into rivers or twist like snakes in front of him, but he kept the engine roaring because Poole told him to. Schoolboy Close no longer looked like a child. His eyes had become hollow dark with soot and strain. His face lost all traces of youth. He had fired so many bursts into fleeing enemy soldiers that his own sense of innocence had simply vanished. Jailbird Boggs carried splinters and scars on his hands from loading shells so fast the metal tore at his skin. His anger, which once came from his past, now fueled every motion inside the tank. Groundhog Ola, with his nervous look and sunken eyes, carried a different burden. His perfect marksmanship meant he saw every enemy they killed. He lived inside the scope so long that the world beyond it felt unreal, and then there was Poole. The man who kept them together was also slowly coming undone. He slept almost never. He ground his teeth until pieces chipped off. He insisted on riding exposed in the hatch even during storms of gunfire. He claimed the periscopes were coffins. He said that if he closed himself inside the turret, he would become blind, and if he became blind, they would all die. The war was eating him from the inside, but he refused to stop. At Columbia, this obsession nearly ended everything. During twilight, they pushed through a wooded path to flank a town. Shadows stretched across the ground, making every movement uncertain. Poole stood in the hatch scanning the dark edges of the forest. Then a German flak gun hidden in a barn roared to life. Green tracer rounds slashed through the air. One struck the hatch rim and sprayed metal into Poole's face. He shouted for reverse, but Richards froze. The engine stalled, and for a moment in the mood sat helpless, a perfect target for the German gun. Poole did not duck. He did not drop inside. Instead, he reached for the .50 caliber machine gun on the roof. Standing fully exposed, he opened fire at the barn. His bullets tore through wood and sent hay bursting into flames. Smoke billowed out, blinding the German crew long enough for Richards to finally restart the tank. In the Mood lurched backward just as a shell smashed into the ground where they had been moments before. They hid in the woods for a breath of time, their hearts shaking, their minds rattled. Boggs whispered a prayer. Ola trembled, Close wiped blood from his nose. Poole slid inside his face torn by shrapnel. He lit a cigar with shaking hands and said one quiet sentence. "We know where they are now. Go finish it." And they did. They swung wide and Ola fired a 76mm shell straight through the barn. The flak gun exploded. That moment defined Poole more clearly than any medal. He could turn fear into movement. He could turn exhausted men into relentless fighters. He had become a force that pulled everyone behind him like a storm front. By mid-September, their numbers were so staggering that even hardened officers struggled to believe the reports. In the Mood had destroyed 258 enemy vehicles. They had taken 250 prisoners. They had survived 3 tanks being shot out from under them. But there was one law that even Poole could not outrun. The law of chance. No streak lasts forever. No gamble avoids loss forever. A coin may land heads 10 times, 20 times, but eventually tails appears. As the 3rd Armored Division reached the Siegfried Line, the mood shifted. France had been a war of movement, but Germany lay ahead as a war of attrition. The hills grew steeper, the forests thicker, the roads narrower, the enemy more determined. On the morning of September 19, 1944, Poole felt something he had not felt before. Something heavy. He told another soldier that he was on his last tank. He told General Rose that he felt the bell tolling. Rose urged him to step back to train men or help morale. Poole refused. He said he could not leave his crew. They went in together, and they would come out together. It was a promise fate was ready to test. On the morning of September 19, 1944, a heavy stillness settled over the crew of In the Mood as they prepared for another push toward the German border. The sky hung low with grey clouds, and the distant rumble of engines echoed through the valleys. The 3rd Armored Division was pressing toward Stolberg, where the Germans had prepared a trap designed specifically for aggressive American columns. Poole was unusually quiet. He told a fellow soldier that he felt he was on his last tank. He told General Rose that he felt a strange tolling in the air like a bell warning of what was coming. Rose offered to pull him off the line and send him home to train other crews, but Poole refused. He said if he left his boys they would die. He said they had gone into this war together and he would bring them out or fall beside them. With those words he climbed into the hatch of In the Mood for the final time. Their mission was to flank Stolberg and cut the German retreat, but the Germans had prepared the ground with brutal precision. They hid a Panther tank behind a concrete wall covering the only intersection the Americans had to cross. The long 75mm German gun pointed directly at the kill zone. The Panther waited with the patience of a hunter that knows the prey must eventually step into view. As In the Mood rolled toward the town, the crew operated with perfect rhythm. Baby Richards drove fast because Poole demanded speed. Groundhog Ola scanned left and right, searching windows, rooftops, and alleys for signs of danger. Jailbird Boggs held an armor-piercing round ready to load. Schoolboy Close watched the lower hull for infantry movement. Poole stood in the hatch, exposed as always, scanning the rooftops. But speed, the thing that had saved them so many times in open fields, now became a curse inside tight city streets. The buildings blocked their sight. The corners hid threats that the crew could not see until it was too late. As they approached the intersection, Poole caught a glimpse of something black and round at the far end. It took one heartbeat for him to realize what it was. The muzzle of a Panther pointing directly at them. It was less than 100 yards away, almost point-blank range. Poole screamed for Baby to back up. Richards slammed the brakes. Sparks flew from the tracks as the Sherman skidded on the stone road. But the Panther gunner had been waiting for hours for this one moment. He did not need to adjust. He did not need to aim. He simply pulled the trigger. The first shot smashed into the ground beside the Sherman's tracks. The explosion lifted the 30-ton tank completely off the road. In the Mood rolled sideways and crashed into a ditch, landing on its right side. Inside the tank, the crew slammed against steel walls. Boggs struck the breech and fell unconscious. Close's face hit the bow gun shield, and blood ran from his nose. Ola clung to the elevation wheels as the world tilted around him. Poole was thrown halfway out of the hatch, his ribs slamming against the rim. Smoke filled the hull as the engine screamed uselessly with the tracks spinning in the air. They were trapped. A disabled tank in front of a ready Panther was death. Poole tried to shove himself free to help his men, but the German commander was not finished. The Panther fired a second shot. This time the shell hit the turret directly. A brutal impact split steel and sent fragments slicing through the air with the speed of sound. One of those jagged pieces tore into Poole's leg with devastating force. The world around him muffled into ringing silence. Dust swirled, blood poured. He tried to stand, but his body failed him. He looked down and saw the ruin of his leg. The man who had stood tall in the hatch for 81 days now lay broken in the dirt. He did not cry out. He did not shout orders. For the first time since arriving in France, he was silent. But the German gunner made a final mistake. He assumed the tank crew was dead. He underestimated the bond between 5 men who had survived fire and steel together. Jailbird Boggs woke first. His vision was blurred, but he heard Poole groaning above him. Ignoring the pain in his skull, he crawled out of the overturned tank. Close followed, dragging the medical kit. The two of them pulled Poole from the hatch while sniper rounds cracked through the air. They carried him toward a ditch, and Groundhog Oler helped them lower him into a shallow foxhole. The Panther still prowled the intersection looking for new targets, but the crew of In the Mood refused to abandon their commander. They applied a tourniquet. They injected morphine. Poole's face had gone pale. His breath came in short bursts, yet he did not ask for help or comfort. He did not ask to see home or family. He pulled baby Richards close by the collar and gave his final order of the war: "Somebody take care of my tank." Even as he bled out, he worried about the machine that had carried them through France. Reinforcements arrived minutes later. Medics loaded Poole onto a jeep and drove him away. As he faded in and out of consciousness, he twisted his head to look back at In the Mood lying on its side with smoke curling from the turret. The 81-day run was over. The ace had fallen. The doctors saw his leg and made the only choice possible. They amputated high above the knee. When Poole woke up, he found that his war in Europe had ended. He was 25 years old with one leg, a chest full of medals, and no clear future. He was sent home in June 1946. But his battle was far from over. In peace he faced a deeper, silent war. He felt empty without his crew. He missed the noise and danger that had defined him. He feared that he had abandoned his men even though they had saved his life. Official policy said amputees could not serve again. The math said his career was done. But Poole had spent his whole life ignoring the math, and soon he would fight the system itself just to return to the army. He refused to give up. The German shell that tore through the turret did more than flip the tank and scatter the crew. It ended the battlefield life of the man who had driven fear deep into the German army for 81 days. As the dust settled around the overturned Sherman, Poole looked down at what remained of his leg and understood with cold clarity that the war he had fought with unbreakable fury was finished. Blood gushed into the dirt in bright pulses. His ears rang so loudly he could barely hear the shouts of his own men. But even in those moments, he did not lose his resolve. He struggled to rise only to collapse again as his strength drained away. The crew, however, refused to leave him. Jailbird Boggs was the first to break free of the wreck. He ignored sniper fire that whipped through the air. He ignored the pain in his back and head. He grabbed Poole by the arms and dragged him out of the exposed hatch. Schoolboy Close rushed forward with the medical kit. Groundhog Oler stumbled from the wreck with shaking hands and a pale face. None of them hesitated. They were no longer following any manual. They were not soldiers thinking about survival or enemy fire. They were 4 men trying to save the father figure who had led them through hell. They pulled Poole into a shallow ditch. They wrapped a tourniquet around the shredded limb. Close jabbed morphine into Poole's arm. His face was grey, his breath short, yet his mind was still on the one thing that mattered most to him: his tank. He grabbed Richards by the collar and whispered the last battlefield order he would ever give: "Somebody take care of my tank." Even as he bled out in a foreign field, he was thinking of the machine that had carried them through France and crushed German resistance again and again. Reinforcements arrived, and the medics rushed him to a waiting jeep. As they drove him away, Poole twisted his head to look back. He saw In the Mood lying on its side in a German ditch. Smoke curled from the turret. Metal groaned as it cooled. For the first time in 81 days, it was silent. And with that silence, the wild, unstoppable storm that had torn a hole through the enemy lines finally came to an end. At the field hospital, doctors examined his leg and made the only decision possible. They amputated high above the knee. When Poole awoke from the anesthesia, the war in Europe was still raging, but his part in it was over. He was 25 with one leg, a chest covered in honors, and a future suddenly stripped of purpose. He returned to the United States in June 1946, where the nation hailed him as a hero. But the quiet life waiting for him was far more brutal than anything he had faced on the battlefield. He opened a gas station and tried to settle into ordinary routines, yet the silence of civilian life felt suffocating. The absence of the roar of engines, the crack of gunfire, and the familiar voices of his crew gnawed at him. He had spent 81 days in constant motion, and now stillness felt like a punishment. He missed the danger, he missed the purpose, and above all, he missed the 4 men who had fought beside him. He feared deep inside that he had abandoned them even though they had saved him from that ditch. Regulations said an amputee could never return to tank duty. The math said he was finished, but Lafayette Poole had never lived by the numbers. He refused to accept a rule if it meant giving up the life he believed he was meant to lead. So he began a long fight, not against the Germans this time, but against the United States Army's medical board. He wrote letters to generals. He argued that a tanker needed his mind, not his leg. He insisted that standing in a hatch was not a requirement for command. He said that leadership came from skill, not from having 2 working legs. He used every bit of his fame to push for a chance to re-enlist. It took years. Many officers dismissed the idea as impossible. Some thought he had gone mad from the horrors he witnessed. Others believed no amputee should ever return to active duty, but Poole did not give up. He pressed and wrote and visited posts until at last in 1948, the Army made a rare exception. They allowed him to return to service. He became one of the only amputees from the Second World War to rejoin the active ranks. He did not return to the front because his fighting days were concluded. Instead, the Army sent him to Fort Knox, the home of armored training. There they placed him in front of new recruits, young men, who had never seen battle, and told him to teach them what he knew. Imagine being a 19-year-old recruit in 1950 learning to drive a tank, and your instructor is a tall Texan with a heavy limp, a chest full of medals and a stare that could silence a room. Poole taught them everything he had learned through fire. He told them manuals were only guides. He told them speed could be armor. He told them that hesitation kills faster than any German 88. Sometimes he would tap his prosthetic leg and say, "This is what happens when you wait too long to act. Do not wait." His lessons shaped a new generation of tankers. He watched as technology changed and the Sherman was replaced by the Pershing and later by the Patton. But no matter how the machines evolved, Poole believed the heart of tank warfare never changed. It was not the steel that won battles. It was the crew inside. It was the trust between 5 men who relied on each other with their lives. For the rest of his career, he carried that belief. He remained in the Army until 1960, when he retired as a chief warrant officer after reshaping the way young tankers understood combat. His battlefield rampage had ended in a German ditch, but his influence carried on through every soldier he trained, and though he never returned to war, his story continued to echo through armored schools and history books. Lafayette Poole remained the man who refused to surrender to odds or fate. Even after losing his leg, he stood back up and found a way to keep fighting. When people look back at the 81-day storm carved by Lafayette Poole and his crew, they often ask how such impossible numbers were ever reached. How did one Sherman tank destroy 258 enemy vehicles? How did one crew kill over 1,000 enemy soldiers? How did 12 enemy tanks fall before a machine that was known across the Army as a rolling coffin? Historians and analysts have spent decades trying to make sense of it. They studied the logs, the after-action reports, and the surviving testimony. And after sifting through the legends and the myths, they uncovered 4 truths that explained how a fragile steel box could become the deadliest tank in the European theater. The first truth was the crew itself. A tank is not a machine. It is a living organism made of 5 minds that must act in perfect unity. Most tank crews were collections of men doing their jobs, but Poole's crew fused into something far beyond that. They stayed together. They refused any promotion that would separate them. Baby Richards drove as if he shared a single heartbeat with the engine. He could sense when to brake or accelerate without being told. Jailbird Boggs loaded shells with instinct, not instruction. He already knew which round was needed before Poole even shouted. Schoolboy close cleared the lower hull and defended the tank with a steady hand that ignored fear. Groundhog Oler saw farther than any machine could. He could detect the smallest movement long before a German commander even recognized he had been spotted. Their unity turned the Sherman into a predator. It reacted faster than the enemy could even process what was happening. The second truth was the very thing officers tried to correct in Poole. His flaw became his weapon. Poole's recklessness broke the German battlefield cycle. Armies operate on a loop known to soldiers. They observe, they orient, they decide, they act. This loop allows a trained force to respond to threats with discipline, but Poole shattered this system. German commanders had trained for careful American assaults. They expected caution and cover. Instead, they saw a tank rush forward at full speed, firing even while jolting across broken ground. They saw a commander standing tall in the hatch, unfazed by incoming fire. They hesitated because none of it fit their tactical expectations. In those moments of hesitation, Poole closed the gap and destroyed them. His refusal to fear death created a terror that the enemy could not comprehend. The third truth was the sight of Groundhog Oler. In tank warfare, the rule is simple. The tank that fires first lives, and to fire first one must see first. Oler possessed a gift that defied normal battlefield vision. He noticed the slant of a shadow that did not match the trees. He saw the faint edge of a barrel hidden behind brush. He recognized the shimmer of polished optics in the distance. Poole trusted him without question. If Oler said tank left, Poole turned left and ordered fire. That trust removed the delay that usually cost crews their lives. The fourth and darkest truth was Poole's acceptance of death. Long before he faced that panther in Stolberg, he had already made peace with dying. He told General Rose that he considered himself dead. When fear of death leaves a man, he becomes capable of things no sane soldier will attempt. Poole charged open fields because he no longer believed he would live to see the next day. He pushed his tank until it nearly fell apart because he did not expect to ever drive it back. He acted with a freedom that terrified even his allies. This fatal acceptance made him the most dangerous man in the war because he no longer fought to survive. He fought only to win. Lafayette Poole lived many years after the war. He died in his sleep on May 30th, 1991, at the age of 71. He passed away in Texas, not far from the base where he trained the next generation of tankers. At his funeral, the soldiers who knew his story did not speak only of the medals. They spoke of the boxer who refused to be beaten. They spoke of the man who lost a leg and still fought to return to service. They spoke of the commander who could turn fear into fire inside the hearts of the men he led. Today, if you walk into the Patton Museum of Cavalry and Armor at Fort Knox, you will not find the original in the mood. That tank was left in a ditch in Germany where its final battle ended. But you will find the legacy of the man who commanded it. Training manuals were rewritten because of what he proved possible. Armored doctrine evolved because he showed that speed, aggression, and unity could overpower even superior machines. The Sherman tank was too thin, too tall, and too flammable. It was mocked and feared by the men who rode inside it. Yet for 81 days in the summer of 1944, Lafayette Poole and his crew transformed that flawed machine into a nightmare for the German army. They showed that steel does not define victory. Spirit does, skill does, will does. They proved that a Ronson lighter could burn down the Reich if the right hands held the match. The math said a Sherman should die in its first engagement. The math said a Sherman could not kill a tiger. The math said an amputee could never return to tank duty. But Lafayette Poole spent his entire life proving that the math was only a suggestion. His story is not simply about the tanks he destroyed. It is about defying the odds. It is about refusing to hide when fear says run. It is about stepping into a fight where survival seems impossible and choosing to press forward anyway. In the end, the question that shaped his life becomes a question that echoes far beyond the war. When every number says you will fail, when every sign says retreat, do you step back into safety? Or do you tell your driver to floor it and charge straight into the fire? If you want more forgotten war stories told with truth, grit, and no filters, subscribe now. Your support keeps these missions alive.